Okay, today on the podcast, I'm joined by Jordan Brechenser. He is the president and publisher at Vermont News and Media in Vermont, obviously. Jordan, we spoke yesterday, but good to see you again. Thanks for joining me.
You as well,
Appreciate it.
Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I kind of always start the podcast like we were just saying. I'd love to just get a little bit about your story in local media, your background, kind of like what led you up to where you're at
Yeah,
now.
certainly, certainly. Yeah. I mean, I guess it was just happenstance to some degree, right? I was out of college recently, graduated. I was looking at job opportunities, and for a bit of time, I worked at a friend of mine's auto dealership. And I just remembered having the newspaper rep would come in every week, and business would stop. The owner of the dealership and the general managers, they'd gather around, they'd go behind closed doors, they'd have lunch, and the guy just always had some kind of gravitas when he walked in, and I thought that was kind of cool. Number one, I like the media side of things, and he was apparently retiring, and he offered me a job and said, "Hey, listen, you think you'd be great to fill my shoes? It's a good job. You're not working weekends." And anyways, long story short, I interviewed for that job and started with a small group of weekly newspapers based out of Western Massachusetts and kind of touched into the Southern Vermont region. And that was probably in the early 2000s, and then kind of climbed the proverbial ladder ever since then. Funnily enough, kind of within the same group of newspapers that I started with, they were owned by a larger end. So I kind of just got bounced around from one location to another. And as newspapers were morphing and changing, I just kind of found myself in different elevated roles. Up until now, I've helped sell the group of papers I work for on two different occasions, and I'm a co-owner and partner of Vermont News and Media, which is, as you mentioned, Paul, based here in Southern Vermont.
Awesome. Yeah. Tell me about that a little bit. I wasn't sure if you were like a part owner, but it sounds like you are. Can you give me a little breakdown of Vermont News and
Yeah. So,
Media
so yeah,
publication size? Yeah. Yeah.
you got it, yeah. So Vermont News and Media, Vermont's small, right? It's big in
Mhm.
geography, it's small in people. It's, a little north of 600,000, I think, for a area as big as we are. I think it has the United States smallest capital up in Montpelier, Vermont. So, a lot of woods in between the few residents that reside in this state. So we serve primarily southern Vermont. Some of our products go up into mid Vermont. Um, we were, dated back, to almost 200 years in these communities for when
Wow.
these papers first opened up. Um, and during the heyday of newspapers, a fellow named Dean Singleton, whose name might be familiar if you've interviewed other newspaper publishers. This was one of his papers that he'd acquired, and he formed a company called Media News Group, which out in your neck of the woods would have been the kind of their flagship publication, the Denver Post, where a lot of the
Mm.
admin and C-level staff were based out of. Over the years, those organizations, the Media News Group merged with Journal Register companies. So I don't know if it was the largest, but if not the largest, one of the largest newspaper groups in the United States. And that was held under a title called Digital First Media, which now is kind of like the antichrist of newspapers. They did a great job of clustering these groups together, but ultimately kind of, stripping resources and a financial backer that was part of that group. So anyway, so that was kind of the pinnacle of newspapers as these large clusters were buying all these smaller papers. That was the group that I had worked for. And that kind of hit a pivotal point where it sort of unwind where local ownership came back in. The people saw newspapers in their communities that had very little staff any longer. Morale was down. There wasn't much local journalism being done any longer. In some cases, their offices were gone and things were moving remote. And I helped transition ownership from Digital First Media to a group of local investors in Western Massachusetts, primarily in the Berkshire area. And they had interest in the Berkshire Eagle, which was a paper I was the vice president of for many years, and they wanted to save local journalism. So they bought this cluster of papers, and I worked for them for many years, over 10 years, before I met a local investor here in Brattleboro, Vermont, who had interest in just the Vermont papers. So it kind of, started with papers being independent in their respective cities and towns. Major corporations buy them up, becomes a
Mhm.
conglomerate. That kind of bubble burst, and it kind of transitioned back into local ownership. So I helped shepherd for the second time the ownership of these papers to a fella here in Brattleboro and myself, and that was about 6 years ago. Now, for the first time in well over 60 years, these papers in Vermont, which I should mention what they are, I suppose. The Brattleboro Reformer, it's a daily paper here in Brattleboro, Windham County, Vermont. The Bennington Banner, which is our daily paper in Bennington, Vermont. And we have a daily paper called the Manchester Journal up in Manchester, which is one of the most beautiful regions in Vermont, up in the ski mountain area, top of a mountain. Those are our three newspapers. Obviously, we have websites and social media to support it, and we have two magazines. Both are very well positioned. One's Vermont Country Magazine. It's kind of a statewide tourism magazine, publishes 6 times a year, as well as another magazine called Vermont Maturity, which I bought a few years ago. And it's a lifestyle, it's an adult lifestyle type publication that kind of covers the whole state as well. So those are our publications, and those are the ones that we for the first time in over 60 years, locally own, locally operate, and employ local staff to generate content and sales around.
That's awesome. I love seeing these, not huge conglomerates controlling like local news ecosystems and everything. And then, kind of our first call yesterday, you were talking about, and I kind of related to this because listeners of the show know I'm in Montrose, Colorado, on the west side of the state. We're a town of about 20,000, and to most of this region of the state, we're the big city. So, I'm not in a super rural area, but I'm surrounded by lots and lots and lots of open space and tiny towns.
Yeah.
And like you said, you're up there in Vermont covering these more rural areas, and I think one of the interesting things I want to talk to you about was some of the challenges of that,
Yeah.
or differences of I have a lot of people on here from big cities, bigger urban areas, but I'd love to get kind of your take on the rural aspect of where you guys are operating.
Yeah, certainly. No, the rural aspect makes it challenging. It does. I
Hmm.
mean, you're insulated to some degree. So, I at least have the perspective of having worked for a larger media corporation, as I mentioned before, when we were part of a larger group and cluster. So that had a benefit, right? Because you got a lot of financial backing, you've got a lot of scale and capacity. We had employees that could assist us in a multitude of functions across the state, across the United States, I should say. So that was a benefit of it. The downside is you're owned by a corporation and
Hmm.
a larger entity. So you lose touch, you lose feel, you lose that local aspect, and ultimately you're managed by people who don't live, work, or reside here. So that's the downside to it. Now the perspective of having local ownership and management is you don't have those safety nets, you don't have those resources, you don't have those deep pockets, but you have full autonomy over how to manage your own company and really serve the community, its readers, its businesses to the best of our local ability. And I have found personally, as well as other newspapers I work with, I've worked for, that have taken back local ownership. That really does matter. It makes a big difference. It's a slow moving ship. It takes a long time to get people to understand and rally around you. There's a report out there, a woman named Penny Abernathy. I forgot the name of the book,
Yep.
but she published something that really resonated with me in a book that a large study was done. I think it was something like, and don't quote me on this, Paul, but it's something like, you know, 8 out of 10 adult Americans interviewed believe that their local newspapers are in fine financial health, while only 2 out of those 10 support them with a paid subscription.
Right.
So there's this major disconnect in how newspapers are functioning. So, that's kind of the benefit of working for a large corporation and the downside, and the benefit of being locally run and managed. And the downside is that we have to be nimble, and we don't have those kinds of resources that the larger companies do. So, how do we best serve our communities? What are the type of content that our readers must have? What are things that we can afford to cover? How many reporters can we put out on any given beat? Uh, People love to see every single sports game covered at a local level, whether
Yep.
it's Pee Wee baseball all the way up into any colleges or high school sports, and that's really hard to cover all of them at all times. I'm
Hmm.
back in the day, we had 3 full-time sports reporters here in Brattleboro where I sit today. I think we probably had a total of 10 in this cluster that I run, and today we have 2 and a half on a good day, right? And there's just as many sports going on and just as many parents who wanna see their kid covered and featured in the sports section. So, where do we deploy our resources? That certainly is a challenge. The good news is that we can do outreach. We live here, we work here, we talk to our neighbors, we talk to the people whose kids are in sports and to the businesses here. So we're much more firsthand to really understand what are the needs of the community, what do they want to see published, and then we kind of triage and get to it the best that we can.
That's awesome. Could you give me an idea? You were just talking about the community, and could you give me an idea of like the populations? I think you said there's three papers or three publications. Like, what are we looking at? Do they cover what's the geographic size and like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
population size
So
they cover?
so yeah, I mean, I could Google it quickly, but I won't since you're recording this. I think the combined population is under 30,000 for the counties that we serve in. So it's a pretty small, and that's at the whole southern tip of Vermont, southern end of
Hmm.
Vermont, I should say. So they're pretty small, they're pretty sparse. It is an older age demographic that we have here in Vermont. I remember seeing some state studies done a few years ago, and we have a decreasing population of people under the age of 30 and a much older age demographic than the states that we are surrounded by here in New England. So, that's good. An older reader tends to be a newspaper subscriber. A younger reader, you're lucky to get them as a digital sub if you can get them to. But it's also challenging. I mean, one of the biggest things that when we kept peeling the layers of this onion back as we took back local ownership and then kind of refined it to smaller and smaller bite-sized chunks is, okay, without corporate resources, how do we run this thing, right? And we started looking at things and worrying about things that we never really had to. One of the biggest things I uncovered as I started breaking this thing into smaller pieces was the cost of delivering newspapers, printed newspapers, was staggering. It was absorbed in a bunch of other areas that was easy to do, and you had, aggregates of huge number of carriers. But once we broke it down to a smaller level, we realized that I was losing about 10 cents to 20 cents a week per subscriber I had. And I said, well, shoot, I can't do that for much longer. Revenues are going down. A lot of the larger advertising that we had back in the good old days, I call it, which I'm not even sure if it was the good old days, but to
Right.
me, it feels like it was. A lot of those have gone away. I mean, back when I started here, 2002, I guess it was easy. I didn't think it was easy then, but I was in sales back then, and then looking back, it
Hmm.
was easy. If you were a business, you wanted to spend money, you really had three choices. Here in Vermont, a little funny fact you might not know, billboards are illegal. You can't have billboards. They don't want to
I did not know that. It's
they
kind of
don't wanna
nice.
yeah, they don't wanna ruin the picturesque views of
Yeah.
mountains, so you really only had a few options. You had the yellow pages, and that was a transactional media, right? If somebody needed a service, they went to the yellow pages, they found you, that's how they reached you, the
Hmm.
equivalent of Google today, right? Google wasn't around back then.
Yeah.
You had the newspaper, and, that was a very trusted, widely read platform and media that most businesses ran in on some basis, and then you had radio. And those were really only your three options to market and advertise to reach somebody. Well, now fast forward to 2026 that we're almost in, and there's 50 different ways to advertise.
Hmm.
It's easier, it's cheaper, it's more transactional, and a lot of these are tech giants that have name gravitas, Facebook, Google, YouTube, etc. We all know
Yeah.
what they are, that, people who are coming into marketing positions, people that are now the second and third generations of running a business, they're more familiar with those platforms than they are, hey, how do you put an ad into a newspaper? It's expensive, it's clunky, it's time consuming.
Hmm.
And if you're not a newspaper reader, it's not the first place you go to place an ad buy. So that has certainly changed over the years, and hence we have a lot less revenue than we once did as we lose these big buys, national buys, grocery store flyers, as businesses go out of business. Circuit City and other ones that were in my markets that
Yep.
just shut down. Those things don't come back; they don't get replaced. Talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars a year of advertising that disappears, and how do you combat that? So you start looking at granular things, and to get back to my point of circulation, Paul, that was something that we realized we were spending a ton of money to deliver newspapers. Back in the day, we had youth carriers. That doesn't happen any longer. 15-year-old kids don't ride their bikes around town to throw newspapers out in the afternoon. So we had an adult carrier force, which was a very niche position. It's the kind of person who
Right.
wants to pick up newspapers in the middle of the night and drive their own vehicle for pennies per drop up and down rural roads. Those roads could be 20, 30 miles of dirt road up the side of a cliff that has 4 houses that get the newspaper on it. It's not economical. So that's probably why we were losing money for all these years on delivery in these rural markets. We were able to balance it out in markets that had larger coverage and larger metros. So I had to make a tough decision, I think about 5 years ago, that we needed to take the papers and put it in the hands of the United States Postal Service, which isn't unheard of. It was rare in this New England region. It was rare. Most of the newspapers I have seen are in larger metros. They're out in your neck of the woods, West Coast, that had been
Hmm.
using the mail to deliver their products for a long time. Come to find out, the United States Postal Service newspapers were one of their largest customers before Amazon came in and kind of broke the camel's back, which it absolutely did do. But I had no real choice, right? Because if I'm losing 10 cents per week per subscriber that I have, um, and that number was only going up, I was better off to lose a subscriber, as crazy as that sound,
Right.
than I was to retain them. Newspapers did a really bad job, just historically, of properly pricing subscriptions. It was
Hmm.
before the subscription model was even really invented. I think newspapers were probably one of the first, but back then, 90% of our revenue came from advertising, and we just kind of assumed that would always be the case.
Right.
So giving newspapers, selling newspapers was a lost leader. If you broke even on it, fine. If you lost a few bucks, that was okay too. You wanted circulation volumes and numbers because that attracted advertisers, and advertisers paid for 95% of your company. Well, that's completely changed now. And many newspapers, their subscriber revenues have now surpassed their advertising revenues, which, 20, 30, 40 years ago would have been an unheard of thing. No one would have ever thought that. So, how do you make those pivots? So we pivoted to mail, and people weren't happy about it, to be honest. I received a lot of flack, a lot of negative feedback. I mean, I had legitimate reasons. I put my name on it. I put my phone number on this message. So I had people calling me, and I was able to at least articulate and explain it was out of economics. It was out of necessity. If every single person that was a subscriber of mine, and I'm talking about, handfuls of thousands, all agreed to double the price of their subscription, all of them, not just one or two of them. If they all agreed to double the price of subscription, I could have probably sustained home delivery for a while longer. Still, staffing it was a bear, just to the nature of the job, but I could have sustained it longer. The problem is people don't want to do that. A lot of the readers here, as I mentioned, they're older, they're on fixed incomes, they're used to the pricing that they've been familiar with
Yep.
for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of subscribing to a paper. So for that price to double all of a sudden, they weren't really going to go along with. So moving to mail was what needed to happen. And the problem is that the post office is just it's challenged. It's same some of the same issues, especially more in rural markets. They've got smaller populations to pull employment from. The routes are a heck of a lot longer than they are in major metros. And I found pretty quickly that people didn't realize how bad the mail really was here in Vermont. You think about it, you open up the mailbox one day, there's nothing there, and the next day you open it up and there's something there, and you say, "Oh, well, I didn't have any mail yesterday, it all came today." All of a sudden you put in a daily newspaper into that mix, and it's a timestamp, and people realized, "Oh, wait a minute, no, I thought that I just didn't get mail yesterday. Nobody delivered to me. There was no carrier that even came by." So all of a sudden I'm realizing no one's getting the paper on a Wednesday on these 2 or 3 routes. And then, Thursday they get 2 papers. Well, I don't want yesterday's news today. I want yesterday's news yesterday, today's news today. It's a People who read newspapers, I have found, are very routined. They
Hmm.
like that consistency. And when you break that consistency, it creates challenges in how they go about their daily business. And so that's the importance of newspapers to those who have grown up on them and use them as a daily tool, whether it's getting the headline news or doing their morning crossword puzzles and comics with their cup of coffee. People have rituals with newspapers that when you break those rituals, they're upset about. So I spent the first year after I transitioned to mail doing 2 things. On the phone every morning, talking to hundreds of upset people who didn't get their newspaper or mail delivery, And then two, battling with the post office, who I'm paying hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to deliver my products, who assured me that after all the due diligence and work that we did, this was going to work. They're capable of doing this, to find out days later they really weren't. They had no
Hmm.
idea what they were what they were doing here locally. There's great carriers there and there's great postmasters around, but they just don't have the support from the post office. They don't have enough staff
Right.
to support this. And unfortunately, every year they're more beholden to Amazon than anybody else. So their primary goal is deliver all the packages and get to the mail second. And
Right.
that happens on a daily basis. So that has been a painful thing to have to endure for my subscribers and to myself, because I do put my name on it and I field every phone call that comes in when somebody wants to talk to somebody in charge and who made this stupid decision. I unfortunately am the guy who made that stupid decision. Now, we did have some luck. I didn't just sit back and take it. I have worked with state legislature. I've worked with our governor's office. I've worked with lawmakers in this state last year, between the pressure of many states who are encountering this. Unique to me. It just was more uncovered here when I moved to mail. There was a bipartisan law put in place called the Delivery for Democracy Act. And what this did was it, at least on paper, mandated that newspapers had an obligation to deliver the products that we pay for. And by the way, another little tidbit of fact: when you pay for postage for your products that get mailed, the way that I go about it, you prepay for that postage, and there is no refund mechanism in place. And there's
Hmm.
also no guarantee that the post office has to deliver those products. Somewhere
Really?
in their legal mumbo jumbo and disclaimer, delivery is not guaranteed, but prepayment for postage is guaranteed. So what a great business model, right? Um, so the Delivery for Democracy Act was enacted, I guess, last year. It was maybe voted last year and enacted this year. I can't quite remember. And it was supposed to mandate that the post office has to deliver, I think, 90 or 95% accurately. And if they can't uphold to that, they're no longer able to take postal rate increases, which, because they're in such a deficit, they're constantly taking increases. I've absorbed over 20% increases to my postal rates in the past handful of years. Getting, just the rate goes up and up and up for me, and delivery goes down and down and down, and I lose subscribers. It is an absolute detrimental proposition for any newspaper who's reliant on the postal system to deliver their papers to be in. It's why 2,000 plus papers went out of business last year. It's a big piece of it. When you're paying for delivery and they don't deliver, and you're getting higher and higher rates and you're losing subscribers, that's a recipe for a quick out of business, right? So that is the challenge we're still experiencing. I guess without sounding too obtuse about it, it's just the way the world is, right? I mean,
Right.
we're talking about, Social Security and things of that nature going fully digital at the federal level, right? So if you want your benefits being paid out to you, you have to log into a digital portal. There's banks across the country who are stopping having local offices and they're going purely to online banking. So we certainly are in a digital world, and I guess there's some things that if you don't want to be in a digital world, you don't have the benefit of being part of. I still think printed and delivered newspapers are a part of that world, but if more and more people went to our e-editions, it would be a lot easier for news dissemination. My e-editions never fail. My print delivery does. It's a greener and more economical solution. We're not having so many trucks and vehicles. The ink, the paper, the plates. There's a bit of waste that goes along with the production of printed newspapers as well. So, again, I'm in an aging populace of a state here. More people prefer to have their news delivered in print format than logging on and seeing that replica version digitally, unfortunately.
Right. Man, do you ever like hear about something when you're talking to somebody and you haven't put much thought into it, and then it starts popping up everywhere?
Hmm.
You kind of talked about this with me a little bit yesterday. And just since yesterday, my mom called me last night, and she was just complaining because she'd sent a Christmas card and a Christmas Hanukkah card and a check to my sister in Montana. Hasn't arrived. They don't know where it is.
Yeah.
And then this morning, I'm not making this up. This morning, 2 hours ago, I was at the rec center with my wife. We go and work out there every morning, and our postal carrier was there. And I overheard him talking about like how overworked he is and how they're, because we're pretty rural too, and how they're offering people $20 an hour to deliver packages, but they have to use their own car. And I'm like, I don't think I would take that deal. That does
Yeah,
for with the wear and tear up mountains and everything. So
absolutely.
it's kind of it's just funny. You pointed out yesterday. Now it's like it's popping up everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're reliant on the mail for something that's
Right.
meaningful to you, you don't really notice how broken it is. I
Yeah.
didn't notice how broken it was, but I can tell you, I mean, I had empathy for a lot of people. I had people calling me, saying, not only do I not get my paper every day that it's in the hands of the mail, but I haven't been getting my medication regularly. I had a woman
Yeah.
who didn't receive I mean, this is people of a certain age vintage, right?
Hmm.
And she didn't receive her payments for 2 months back to back, and it affected her credit score, and she got a repo notice that she was devastated.
Jeez.
This is a 80-year-old woman a
Right.
widow, she's dealing with finances on her own. She does it methodically because she gets it in the mail. She
Right.
writes a
Right.
check, she puts it in the roster. She didn't get it for a month or 2 and just obviously didn't cross her mind, and here she is having hits to her credit score and repo notices. She was devastated. She didn't have any family to call. I've had people primarily, you know, elders and senior citizens, but literally crying on the phone to me because that mail is really their lifeline. When you're here in rural Vermont and you might not have family around and you might not have a partner with you any longer, getting mail, getting your medicine, getting letters, getting checks, being able to put things out, that's really your form of communication. They're not on their phones emailing. They're not tweeting with people back and forth. So when those external and internal communication mechanisms are also compromised, it's life altering to somebody who's in their late 70s, 80s, who are just is
Hmm.
used to that type of communication tool. So it's been challenging. I felt awful. I still do feel awful about having to make that hard decision because like I said, I work here, I live here. So when I see somebody and they say, "Hey, what do you do?" and I tell them I'm waiting for that punch to the face about you took away my home delivery newspaper, and I've got a great pitch down as to why, and most people at the end of it say, "Geez, I get it. I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
I like it the way it was back then." And I say, "Guess what? So do I."
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I was just gonna ask you next. I mean, I've done 0 research into this. Like, are there any other options for you to make economic sense? I imagine UPS and FedEx would be too
Yeah.
expensive. Like
Too expensive and not set up for daily delivery to all of the streets that we go to. That's the
right,
problem. The post office is the perfect partner when you think
right.
about it. They
Yeah.
are going up and down every single residential street that we have here, whether it's that 23-mile dirt road with 4 houses, they have an obligation to deliver mail to those 4 houses. So if the post office was just reinvested it. I don't this is too far down the rabbit hole for probably most people, unless some of your listeners are publishers who are dealing with mail. But DeJoy, who is the Postmaster General, he resigned a few months ago. I don't know who's acting at this point now. He was put in place by Trump on his first term to run the post office like a business, which he did by realizing it's running in a deficit and
Right.
stripping all of the resources out. And that's the real problem is much like newspapers, they're trying to do as much as they used to do with, half the staff and less funding, right? So
Mhm.
I can see the challenges of the postal system because it's very similar to the challenges that I have. More people are using
Right.
digital, so less stamps, less revenue. The workforce is hard to pull from. I mean, the post office, it's a pretty good job when you think about it. You get in, it's one of the few jobs that still offers you a pension.
Yeah.
But, just finding people, I mean, McDonald's down the street today, I drove by this morning, has a sign out $21 per hour for their to go work at McDonald's. I'm sure it's third shift, the worst shift to fill, but $21 an hour, right? And they
Yeah.
provide benefits.
You're
So
inside, you get lunch every day. Like,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want to do it myself, but I can see if the choice was that or jump through the hurdles of the civil service exam, which I'm not even sure if you still need to do. I have tried to go on the United States Postal Service portal for job application.
Oof.
It's the clunkiest system you've ever seen. It was
I
built
can
by somebody
imagine.
in government, or it was built as a way to weed every single person out who doesn't have a tremendous IQ and digital acumen. I think it's the first, not the latter.
Probably.
But anyways, just staffing is certainly a challenge here in these rural markets for everybody. Certainly, that doesn't that it touches the post office as well.
Man, yeah, so there's really no great solution to keep the print
There,
moving
there, there,
forward and
there, there isn't a great solution. No, I mean, I do hope with the Joy stepping down. I hope that whoever's appointed to the cabinet realizes that there needs to be changes if the post office is going to survive. I'd be happy with privatization of the post office because,
Right.
like I said, I'm giving the post office $100,000 a year in postage, and I'm an
Hmm.
upset customer. And if somebody was giving me a couple $100,000 a year in revenue, and they were upset, and they called me, I would be doing everything in my power
Right.
to rectify that situation. The problem at the post office is nobody cares. I mean, the carriers might say, geez, Jordan, I'm really sorry. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter to them. My money, when I started having them deliver newspapers, it didn't help any of the carriers or the local staff. It's just
Right.
bundles of newspapers that now they need to carry along with their mail. It makes their day to day much more
Yep.
challenging. And
Yep.
where my money goes to up the totem pole, I have no idea, but I have been completely unable to climb that totem pole and find somebody who cares and has any kind of customer service ability to say, I'm going to try to fix this for you. Let me fix what's broken. I eventually got to the top of the totem pole that I could and was told, listen, I'm sorry, we really can't support this. I don't see any hopes in the near future, and better luck next time was kind of what I was
Yeah.
told.
The
And
people.
by then it's too late. You've let the carrier force you had, they're gone. You made the decision to mail. There's a lot of investment required for that. We had to invest in machinery and technology that was hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to sort and label all of our newspapers for mail
Jeez.
processing. So by the time you let your handful of carriers go, you stop the bleeding on delivery loss, which we did. You invest in this equipment. You go through months of figuring out how to make this work. I mean, it's clunky from the point where
Hmm.
I print my papers to the point when they get to somebody's home. It is riddled with fail points. There's probably 4 or 5 different people who need to touch that paper and put it in the proper place for it to come out the other side at the correct resident's home. And that's assuming that the post office is fully staffed and delivering to all of their streets and residents. Any one of those 4 different juncture points, if somebody's not there or asleep at the switch, is forgetful, that paper goes into, who knows where and may or may not ever come out the other end. Meanwhile, I paid for the ink, I paid for the paper, I paid for the postage.
Man, that's crazy. Yeah, I've just been thinking as we've been talking, I just can't think of a way out of it. So let me ask you a question about your publication because this show is a lot about sustainability, business models, et cetera, in local journalism.
Yep.
And you obviously don't have to share numbers, but like I know your area is an aging demographic. They really like print, and I get that. How big of a piece of a pie is that for you? Do you have other revenue sources coming in? Like, what's that look like for
Yeah,
you
I
guys?
mean, so I mean, overall circulation revenue does still make up about 20-ish% of our overall revenue. So it's meaningful. It is
Yeah,
meaningful.
definitely.
And forecasting 5 years down the road from now, I think it's more like 30%, 40%, right? And there definitely is a pivot from an advertising funded organization to a subscription funded organization. So our subscribers are very meaningful to us. Ultimately, it's also how we leverage our numbers. So, of that 20% of our revenue coming from subscribers, roughly 70% of our subscribers still get the paper delivered physically, while
Hmm.
only 30% choose to get it digitally. So, that certainly tells you something about the
Yeah.
appetite for how people consume news. And that's kind of how I preface this to people is just this. I've got, 20 plus staffers and a slew of freelance people who working day to day to generate news content here in Southern Vermont. We got more feet on the streets covering more news related items than anybody else does in our markets and regions. How you get that news is kind of up to the consumer, right? I mean, most people want some fraction of what we're talking about, whether it's courts and crimes, whether it's, their kids' high school sports coverage, whether it's obituaries, whether it's business news or entertainment news, which we do a lot of. Most people want some section of our content. How you receive that content's up to you. The most reliable, economical way is to receive it in a digital format. And we still put together a e-edition replica version of the newspaper that we push out to our digital subscribers on a daily basis. We think people like that because it's still curated like a newspaper. It flips digitally like a
Hmm.
newspaper. It has the same layout and architecture as a newspaper. But I think it's a it's a half measure or a trick to get people who, like printed newspapers to agree to this lesser format.
Right.
And there's a cost to produce that, still. So I wonder in the future, will an e-edition, a replica version of what a newspaper looks like, be meaningful in 5 years, in 20 years? Or is it just the content coming in, whether that be a newsletter, whether it be a podcast or a video cast, right? It's we're generating the news, we're coming up with ways to push it out there. And unfortunately, when we're talking about the print vessel of it, that is costly and challenged.
Yep. Man, this is I usually like to tie a nice bow on these episodes, but this is a frustrating one, man. I'm like, I don't know. I don't have an answer for this
Yeah,
stuff.
listen, I get frustrated. I've been doing this for 22 years, and
Right.
I'm frustrated as well at times. Here's the bow. The bow is, what we do is important. Why it's important? When I made that move to mail, I had told you 1,000 people call me to complain about it. Right? That
Mhm.
means that people care. If
Yep,
if I
that's
made
true.
that move and nobody called me, I'd be really up Shit's Creek. Can you say Shit's Creek on this? You can edit
Yeah,
that out.
yeah. It's
Okay.
there's no censoring here. Yeah.
Okay, right. I mean, if nobody cared, that would be an even bigger concern. So, what we do is important. The kinds of things that we cover are important. Having local independent media in your community, whether you engage in it or not, or whether you know it or not, it's also important. There's no one else doing what we do out there. And an informed community is an engaged community. And there's certainly studies out there, you've probably touched upon them, that, what happens when there's these news deserts? What happens when
Mhm.
there's no paper to cover town politics? And, ultimately what happens is, there's no watchdog,
Yep.
corruption goes up. People are unknown what's going on around them. A new business opens up and no one's there to cover it and talk about it. A person of importance in the community passes away. There's no one to shine a light on that person's legacy. There's a lot of things that we do that people just inherently believe is just going to always be there. And when it's not, communities are really remiss. And I've seen this many times where a newspaper traditionally owned by a larger company will get shut down, it's shuttered, there's a news desert. Local people will come in and rally to cobble together a weekly newspaper or some kind of forum where community can share things. So people unto themselves want news. They want to know what's going on in their backyard. And I think that that'll be around for all years to come by nature. So that's the pretty bow, is that what we do, I don't think will ever go away. I think there'll always be a desire and appetite for it. The challenge is, how do you stay viable? How do you stay economically viable? And how can you get people to support your mission in a way that keeps you in business? And those are the challenges that newspapers across the country are battling on a daily basis.
Yep. I mean, that pretty much speaks to the core of this show, why it's so important and how difficult it is and everything. I think that's a good spot to wrap it up.
Okay,
Jordan,
Paul.
where tell me where people can find you. What do you want me to link to or promote or anything if anybody wants to get in touch or see your stuff?
Yeah, I mean, if people want to look at our content, I mean, our websites are easy, www.reformer.com, www.benningtonbanner.com, or www.manchesterjournal.com. Those are our three newspapers, and within there you can find most of our contact information and publications of like magazines and things that I speak about. My email is publisher@reformer.com, and then I just rattled off my URLs for my websites if somebody wanted to look at content or get a better sense of what these publications are I referred to.
Cool. Yeah, I'll link to all that. Jordan, thanks so much.
No
This is
problem,
a
Paul.
good one. I haven't had this discussion, so thanks for coming on
Oh,
and
good. I'm glad it's something at least somewhat fresh and new.
yeah, thanks for enlightening me.
Newspapers are also notorious because we all have the same challenges. So I go to
Right.
some conferences and I'm on some boards of different newspaper organizations and groups. And it's like the same Groundhog's Day conversation at every one you go to. It's digital strategy growth and new
Yeah.
ways to bring in revenue. And just
Yeah.
so I always am concerned that anything that I speak at or roundtable type stuff, it's just like that's been said 1,000 times in this last month. But if this is something that you haven't touched upon, I'm glad it's at least fresh content for you.
Yeah, I'll call it a win because we haven't talked about AI once on this episode, so I'll just end it at that. Until I said the last word, until I just said it right then.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, Jordan, thanks, man.
All right, Paul. Be in touch.
Yeah.
Send me when it's all done. Send me the link so I
Yep.
can share it around.